It all started with a letter. Not even a call. No explanation, no emotion, just cold ink on expensive paper left on the kitchen counter, next to a half-drunk cup of Earl Grey. Claire, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I need a fresh start. Please don't try to find me. It's over. Damien. I stood there in the kitchen of our narrow stone townhouse in Edinburgh, the morning light slicing through the window like a scalpel. My breath caught in my chest. Not just because Damien had left, but because he had taken something with him. Something irreplaceable. Something sacred. I am Claire Bennett, 33, daughter of Harold Bennett, the man who once held half of Edinburgh's antique empire in his ink-stained hands. When he passed, he left me two things, his old bookstore on Rose Street, and a pendant. A vintage sapphire, set in silver and worn soft with time. It was the last gift he gave me before he died. He called it the key to everything. I thought he meant that metaphorically. I was wrong. The moment I saw the letter, I raced upstairs. My bedroom was neat, untouched. Except for one thing, the small velvet box that had once held the pendant was open. Empty. The chain, the sapphire, the tiny clasp where my father had once insisted on embedding a discreet security chip, they were all gone. Panic slammed into me like a wave. The pendant wasn't just a necklace. It was tied to a coded ledger my father had locked in a safe beneath the bookstore floor. A ledger no one but me knew existed. Damien must have found out. Somehow. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the box, trembling. The door creaked open. It was my mother, Margaret, pale and tired, leaning on her cane. Her illness had progressed fast in recent months. She squinted at me, confused. You're shaking. What happened, darling? I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not while she was this frail. It's nothing, Mom, I lied. Just tired. But I wasn't tired. I was furious. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my father's old tracking software. It had been untouched for years. But when I keyed in the pendant's frequency, a small blinking light appeared on the map. My breath hitched. The signal was active. The pendant was still broadcasting. But it wasn't in Edinburgh. It was 5 hours away, on the Isle of Skye. On the outskirts of a quiet coastal village called Elgall. Why there? I zoomed in. The location pinged from a remote cottage near the cliffs. I knew that place. Damien had once mentioned it, said it belonged to a family friend. I thought it was just one of his many half-lies. Turns out, it had been a hideaway all along. By morning, I had packed a bag. I told my mother I was visiting a supplier for the bookstore. Another lie. I hated lying to her. But I needed to do this alone. As the train sped north through the highlands, rain tapping gently on the windows, I stared out and wondered how long Damien had been planning this. Had he ever truly loved me, or was I just a placeholder until he could get what he really wanted? He knew what the pendant meant. He knew it was more than sentimental. He had always been charming, smooth-talking, meticulous in his appearance and mannerisms. But beneath the surface, there was something colder. I had seen flashes of it when I postponed holidays to take care of Mom, when I turned down business dinners to manage the bookstore. He would simmer in silence, then smother it with forced smiles. The train arrived at the edge of Skye in the afternoon. From there, I took a bus, then a taxi. The last stretch I had to walk. My boots crunched along the gravel path that led to the cottage. The wind was sharp, carrying salt and moss. And there it was, the cottage, tucked beneath the cliffs like a secret. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I ducked behind a rock and pulled out my binoculars. I waited. And then I saw him. Damien. Laughing. Shirtless. Pouring wine onto a table on the porch, where another woman waited. Her hair was long and coppery, her laugh too loud for the quiet cliffs. Serena. I recognized her from Damien's firm. She used to drop in for meetings, always dressed a little too perfect. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just watched. Because now I knew, Damien had not only left me. He had betrayed me, used me, and stolen from me. The sun dipped low over the horizon. I stood and turned back toward the village. I needed help. Legal help. I wasn't just chasing a man. I was chasing a crime. And I wasn't going to stop. Not until I had that pendant and my truth back. The village of Elgal was quiet, almost too quiet. A small coastal town with fewer than 300 people, it sat like a secret between the mountains and the sea. The stone cottages leaned against each other like old friends, and the only cafe in town doubled as a post office. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers stuck out like frost on warm glass. I booked a room at a bed and breakfast run by an older woman named Isla, whose sharp eyes and sharper tongue suggested she had already guessed I wasn't here for a holiday. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs and the distant groan of wind across the moors. My mind kept circling back to the woman I saw, Serena, and the laughter that echoed from the porch of the cottage Damien now called home. Had he convinced her of the same lies he once told me? Did she know that the sapphire around her neck wasn't just beautiful, but stolen? The next morning, I took the long walk back to the village cafe and opened my laptop. The connection was slow, but it was enough. I emailed a contact of my father's, a retired investigator named Malcolm who used to work on estate fraud cases. He had always said, "Your dad knew more about legacy than anyone I ever met." That ledger of his wasn't just numbers, it was leverage. Then I called the only number I had been avoiding, Inspector Callum Reed of the Edinburgh police. He and my father had crossed paths once during an embezzlement investigation. Reed had a reputation for being thorough, methodical, and painfully hard to impress. But when I told him what Damien had stolen, and the location of the pendant's tracker, his tone shifted from indifferent to razor-sharp. "Stay where you are, Miss Bennett. I'm coming to Skye." I wasn't expecting him to take the case seriously, but within 6 hours, he was at the B&B, soaked from the rain and carrying a worn leather briefcase. He was taller than I remembered, his salt and pepper hair cropped close, and his gaze so steady it was almost uncomfortable. We went over everything. My father's encrypted ledger, the hidden safe beneath the bookstore, the pendant with its NFC chip, and Damien's sudden disappearance. I showed him the coordinates from the tracker and described Serena. "I've seen cases like this before," Reed said, flipping through his notes. "It's not just theft. It's calculated erasure. He's trying to rewrite your claim to the estate, remove you from the equation entirely." The phrase sat heavy in the air. That night, Reed and I took turns watching the cottage through binoculars from a hidden ridge. Damien moved like he didn't have a care in the world. Serena, however, looked tense. She kept checking her phone, glancing over her shoulder. At one point, she stormed inside, and Damien followed, shouting. I caught a brief look at his face before the door slammed shut. It wasn't smug. It was anxious. Reed narrowed his eyes. He's losing control. The next morning, I woke to a ping on my phone. The pendant had moved. Not far, just down the road, into the village. Reed and I followed the signal discreetly, stopping outside a small gallery that sold local crafts and jewelry. Serena was inside, holding the pendant up to the shopkeeper under the pretense of having it valued. "She's testing the waters," Reed whispered. "Probably doesn't know what she's holding." I entered the shop casually, keeping my distance. Serena didn't notice me. Her voice was tight as she spoke to the jeweler. "It was a gift," she said. "I just want to know if it's authentic." The shopkeeper squinted at it. "Very authentic. Rare cut. Older than it looks." "Where did you say it came from?" Serena hesitated. "My fiancé inherited it. From his grandfather, I think." "A lie." Reed stepped inside behind me and nodded slightly. "She's cracking," he muttered. "If she thinks he's hiding something from her, it won't take much." That evening, Serena posted a photo online. It was subtle, just a beach view from the cottage, but the caption said everything: "Not everything gold is honest." Reed raised an eyebrow. "That's a sign. She's beginning to doubt him." The next step wasn't just legal. It was psychological. Reed suggested a calculated move: leak part of the ledger's existence. Something small, something believable. I uploaded a redacted entry to a cloud drive and sent the link to Damien's old business email, one I was sure he still checked. The title read, *missing pages. You took the wrong key, *. Within an hour, the tracker on the pendant moved again, this time, fast. It pinged down the coast, then suddenly vanished. Reed stood up sharply. "They're running." The chase had begun. The Isle of Skye had a way of looking eternal, like time had forgotten it. But that night, everything moved fast. Too fast. Rain came in sheets, sliding down the windows of the gallery where Reed and I waited in the dark. The signal from the pendant had vanished just minutes ago, and we knew exactly what that meant. Damien had found the tracker. Either by dumb luck or by Serena's warning, he had discovered the one piece of evidence that could place him at the center of everything. "He'll panic," Reed said, rubbing his temple. "Men like him always do once they know they're being watched. He'll either destroy it or try to disappear again." "But he doesn't know we're here," I said. "Not yet." "Then we stay ahead of him." We returned to the cliffside ridge overlooking the cottage, barely visible now through the dense mist and the sway of dark pines. Reed had brought a portable surveillance drone, no larger than a bird, and launched it into the night. It hummed low above the waves, its thermal lens catching outlines behind the thick stone walls. Inside the cottage, shadows danced. Damien paced furiously, a bottle in his hand. Serena stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, no longer smiling. The pendant sat on the table between them, its chain coiled like a silver serpent. "He's unraveling," Reed whispered, watching the feed. "She's confronting him. Look at her hands. They're trembling." I didn't feel victorious. I felt cold. Numb. I had loved Damien once. I had shared my life with him. But all I could see now was someone spiraling in the corner of a lie he built for himself. A coward in expensive clothes. Then something changed. Serena grabbed the pendant and stormed upstairs. Damien followed her, shouting. The drone's view lost them. Reed turned to me. "This is the moment. He either comes clean to her or he tries to shut her down." "Or worse," I said, my voice low. We waited. Minutes crawled by. Then, movement. Serena reappeared, alone. She was crying, dragging a suitcase behind her. She stumbled out the front door and down the steps into the rain. Reed straightened. "She's running." We followed her at a distance. She made it to the road and called a taxi. From behind a parked van, I could hear her voice, broken and shaking. Just get me out of here. I don't care where. She didn't see us as she left. Reed made no move to stop her. Let her go, he said. She's not the target. But her flight gave us an opening. At dawn, we approached the cottage. Damien was alone now. Lights on. Curtains open. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, a mess of papers and wine bottles scattered across the room. The pendant was nowhere in sight. We didn't knock. Reed had already arranged temporary jurisdiction with local police. Within minutes, 2 uniformed officers arrived, just as Damien opened the door, startled. His eyes locked on mine. Claire, he muttered, his voice hoarse. You're not supposed to be here. Neither were you, I replied. Reed stepped forward, badge in hand. Damien Sinclair, you're under investigation for theft, property fraud, and obstruction in an ongoing estate case. We suggest you cooperate. Damien didn't run. He didn't argue. He just sank into a chair and stared at the floor. She left me, he said flatly. Serena. She found the ledger draft. She knows. She should, I said. You lied to everyone. I just wanted a fresh start, he whispered. Something new. Something away from your books and your grief and your bloody family name. Reed nodded slowly. Then you should have left empty-handed. The search of the cottage revealed a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside it was a metal box containing the sapphire pendant, a partial skin of my father's ledger, and documents showing attempted transfers from the Bennett family trust to an account registered in the Cayman Islands. Fraud, in black and white. As Damien was escorted out of the cottage in cuffs, rain soaking his shoulders, he looked back once, at me, not with rage, not even regret. Just emptiness. Serena never returned. We stood in the silence after the police car drove off, the wind dragging sea mist across the cliffs. Reed turned to me. This doesn't end today, he said. There's still a paper trail. Still hearings. Still damage to be undone. I know, I said, wrapping my coat tighter. But for the first time, I'm not running from it. That night, I stayed in the cottage alone. I lit the fireplace and sat on the rug with the pendant in my hands, watching it sparkle with the same dull glow I remembered from childhood. The storm had passed outside. But inside me, the reckoning was only just beginning. The cottage was finally silent. No more Damien's footsteps, no more raised voices, no more lies echoing through the narrow halls. The fire crackled low beside me as I held the pendant, its silver chain warmed by my hands. I had it back, but the victory felt fragile. Beneath my calm surface was a storm of questions that refused to settle. Inspector Reed returned in the morning. He had taken the documents to the nearest station in Portree and spent the night scanning everything into a secure drive. The ledgers, the forged account forms, even drafts of forged signatures that Damien had practiced until they looked like my father's, sloppy and cruel attempts at rewriting a history he didn't belong to. What you're holding, Reed said, nodding toward the pendant, is more than heirloom jewelry. Your father embedded a proximity-coded chip inside the sapphire itself. A backup key. Your name is encrypted into the activation string. I looked down at the gem, stunned. You mean he locked it to me? In a way. The ledger beneath your bookstore, he didn't just hide it. He protected it. And that pendant, when placed against the old safe, will confirm your identity through a magnetic resonance pattern. No one could have opened it but you. It wasn't just inheritance. It was intentional. My father had known even then that people like Damien might try to take what didn't belong to them. His trust in me hadn't ended with his last breath. It had been coded into every inch of the legacy he left behind. I left Skye the following day with Reed beside me. The train ride back to Edinburgh was long, the landscape passing in slow, foggy blurs. I tried to rest but couldn't. My mind kept turning over everything we had found, every forged document, every lie Damien had told Serena and me, every bank transfer he'd initiated with the intention of cutting me out of my own life. At the bookstore, dust hung thick in the air. I hadn't been here in weeks, not since my mother's last episode sent me into round-the-clock care mode. She was in hospice now, resting, with nurses I trusted. That reality gnawed at me in the quiet, but it also gave me space. Time to finish what had begun the day Damien vanished. I unlocked the hidden panel beneath the office rug. Inside was the old safe, a chest of iron and brass with a mechanical lock and a glass-touched panel. I knelt beside it and, for the first time, brought the pendant close to the surface. It hummed. A soft blue light blinked once, twice. The lock released. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, its spine cracked but pages intact. Hundreds of handwritten entries, notes in my father's looping script, small tabs marking financial holdings, trusts, and letters of instruction. There were things here I had never seen, accounts in my mother's name, letters to old friends, and even one addressed to me. I pulled it out with shaking hands. Claire. Asterisk if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer around to guide you. But I've never doubted you'd find your way here. I built everything in this store not for me, but for you. Keep the ledger close. You'll need it more than you realize. And don't trust the ones who smile too easily. The honest ones are usually quiet. Just like you, asterisk. Dad. I pressed the letter to my chest, my throat tight. It wasn't just money that Damien tried to steal. It was memory. Legacy. Love. Reed and I spent days cataloging the ledger's contents. The stolen funds, once traced, matched the amounts Damien had attempted to move offshore. With the ledger as evidence, paired with the pendant's unique code and the financial forensics, we now had a full circle, proof of theft, intent, and conspiracy. But it wasn't over. Late one evening, while reviewing scanned copies, Reed looked up. You know there's more to this than just Damien, right? I frowned. What do you mean? Some of the account transfers list authorizations that match records from a solicitor's office in Glasgow. One name shows up twice, Logan Brightwell. He's a corporate attorney who's been involved in several gray area inheritance disputes. Quiet, but slippery. My gut says Damien didn't do this alone. A fresh chill spread through me. I had been focused on one man. But maybe the network of betrayal ran deeper. Maybe Damien was just the face of a darker design. I closed the ledger and locked it back into the safe. Then we find Logan, I said quietly. And we find out what else Damien was hiding. The fire in me reignited, not with revenge, but with resolve. Glasgow was a city built on layers, of industry, of ambition, and of secrets. From its polished legal buildings to the cobbled alleys that still echoed with footsteps of old power brokers, it hummed with the energy of people who played by rules that only they understood. It was here that Reed and I arrived one gray morning, searching for the man behind the curtains, Logan Brightwell. The name had come up twice in the documents Damien left behind. Once in a notarized transfer request, and again in an offshore compliance form stamped with a digital signature belonging to Brightwell's firm. He wasn't a stranger to the game of hidden wealth and forged trust agreements. He was the kind of solicitor whose work didn't make headlines, but whose fingerprints were often found behind the biggest scandals. Reed knew exactly where to look. We stood outside a polished glass building just off Buchanan Street, where Brightwell's firm, Hollings and Brightwell LLP, occupied the top 2 floors. The receptionist, a woman far too well trained to flinch at unannounced visitors, offered her best neutral smile when we asked for him. "Mr. Brightwell is in meetings all day. May I ask what this is regarding?" Reed flashed his badge with a quiet authority. "It's about one of his clients. Damien Sinclair." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers paused ever so slightly on the keyboard. "I'll see if he's available," she said. 10 minutes later, we were ushered into a sleek office with dark wood shelves, black and white photos of court buildings, and the scent of expensive cologne that clung to the room like ambition. Logan Brightwell looked exactly as I expected. Tailored suit. Hair slicked back. A sharp jawline and sharper eyes. He didn't rise when we entered. He simply gestured to the chairs across from his desk and folded his hands. "Inspector Reed. Miss Bennett. I presume this is about Mr. Sinclair's unfortunate choices." His voice was like polished marble, smooth and cold. "You knew what he was doing," I said flatly. Brightwell tilted his head. "I'm a solicitor, not a mind reader. I draft what my clients instruct me to draft. Within reason." Reed slid a document across the desk. "Is this within reason?" Brightwell scanned the form. His expression didn't change, but his fingers twitched. "I recall the request. Though I was under the impression Miss Bennett had signed off." "I didn't," I said. "My signature was forged. We have the original samples. And we have the pendant, the access key Damien stole." For the first time, Brightwell's mask slipped. "I see," he murmured. "We could make this formal," Reed said, his tone sharp. "Fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud an estate. But I don't think you want that kind of noise." Brightwell exhaled, slow and tight. "What do you want?" "Everything," I said. "Every document Damien filed. Every conversation you had. Every account he mentioned. And any names that were attached to this beyond you and him." Brightwell didn't argue. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a sleek USB drive, and slid it across the desk. "I'll deny everything," he said. "But you'll find what you're looking for on there. And one more thing, he wasn't working alone. Not just me. There was someone else funding him. A silent partner." My stomach tightened. "Who?" He hesitated. "Your cousin. Emma Holloway." The name hit me like ice water. Emma. My mother's niece. We'd grown up together, played in the aisles of the bookstore as children. She had always been envious, always whispering to her parents about how unfair it was that Uncle Harold's fortune would go to me. I hadn't seen her in years. I assumed she'd moved on. Apparently, I had underestimated her grudge. Back at the hotel, Reed and I reviewed the files on Brightwell's drive. Dozens of PDFs, scanned letters, email threads. One name kept appearing in blind carbon copies, Emma. She had been feeding Damien with old family information, helping him bypass certain trust protocols, even suggesting he apply pressure by removing the pendant quickly. "She was behind the idea to steal it," Reed said, voice low. "And she's still out there," I whispered. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined. Damien was just the thief. Emma had lit the match. Later that night, I sat alone by the hotel window, watching the Glasgow rain run in crooked lines down the glass. I thought of my father. I thought of the letter he left me. The bookstore. The safe. The ledger. This wasn't just about Damien anymore. It was about family. And revenge. I never imagined Emma would be capable of something like this. She had always been clever, yes, calculating even, but outright betrayal? That was a different beast. As children, we had built forts between the bookstore aisles and swapped secrets over paperbacks. She used to braid my hair during summer visits, always saying she admired how calm I was. I mistook her envy for admiration. I mistook her silence for peace. Now I knew better. Reed and I returned to Edinburgh that same night. The air in the city felt heavier, as though it, too, had absorbed the revelation. We didn't go back to the bookstore. Not yet. Instead, we drove straight to the estate records office and began digging. If Emma had manipulated her way into my father's affairs, there would be traces, obscure account entries, witness signatures, sealed amendments. We didn't have to search long. There, buried beneath a layer of old transactions, was a trust revision request submitted 6 months before my father's death. It outlined an emergency transfer clause to be enacted upon Claire Bennett's mental or physical incapacitation. The clause proposed temporary stewardship to a qualified family member, Emma Holloway. It had never been enacted. But it had been approved and notarized. Reed leaned back in his chair, scowling. Your father never signed this. He didn't, I said. I would recognize his signature blindfolded. But the form is stamped. It's been processed. I've seen this trick before, he muttered. An insider at the registry or a legal proxy used to sneak through falsified documents. It's a long game. Emma was setting you up for removal in case something went wrong. If Damien failed, she had a backup plan. The thought made my stomach churn. Back at the bookstore, the place felt different. Like it had aged while I was gone. I walked through the aisles slowly, my fingers grazing the spines of worn books. When I reached the office, I unlocked the safe once more and pulled out the ledger. I turned to the final entries, pages my father had written just weeks before his passing. There were notes. Jumbled, unfinished thoughts about trust and vulnerability. One sentence struck me like lightning, *, keep an eye on Emma. She's too close to the wrong people, *. He knew. He had seen it coming. I sat at the desk in silence, the storm building behind my ribs. The next morning, I received an email. No subject. No sender name. Just one sentence, you should have walked away when you had the chance, and an image attachment. It was a photo of the bookstore. Taken that morning. From across the street. Reed called in surveillance immediately. A team swept the perimeter while he worked to trace the IP of the email. It pinged from a location just a few blocks away, an empty flat registered to a shell company linked to Brightwell's former clients. Emma's watching you, he said grimly. She knows we're closing in. The trap was tightening. But she wasn't the only one who knew how to play. I had the ledger. The pendant. The documents. What I needed now was leverage. Reed and I held a press meeting under the guise of a legal update on the estate transition. He carefully leaked pieces of the fraudulent clause, without naming Emma directly, causing a ripple through legal circles. Our goal wasn't to expose her immediately. It was to shake her tree. And it worked. That evening, Emma called me. Her voice was smooth, as if nothing had happened. Claire, she said. We need to talk. I think we're past talking, I replied. I know how this looks, she began, already on defense. But you have to understand, your father made promises. He said the bookstore would be shared. He told my parents it would stay in the family. It is in the family, I snapped. You just didn't get to be the one holding the keys. A pause. "Let's meet," she said. "One time. No lawyers. No police. Just us." Reed advised against it, of course. But I knew Emma. She wouldn't confess with cameras pointed at her. She needed the illusion of control. We arranged to meet the following night at our grandmother's abandoned house on the outskirts of town, a place where we used to play in secret, long before betrayal had twisted our bond. When I arrived, the air was thick with tension. Emma stood in the foyer, arms crossed, her red scarf pulled tight around her throat. "You look tired," she said with a smile. "You look like someone who thought I'd never fight back." She sighed and took a step closer. "You were always the good one, Claire. Always so obedient. But you don't know what it's like to be second. Always second. And stealing made you first?" I asked. "No," she said quietly. "But it made me seen." She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything," she said. "Every file Damien sent me. Every bank record. I don't care anymore. He played me, too. I didn't trust her. But I took the drive." "Why now?" I asked. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "Because you're going to win. And I don't want to go down with him." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "I never hated you, Claire," she said. "I just hated that you never had to fight for anything." I didn't reply. Because now, I was fighting for everything. The flash drive Emma handed over wasn't just a peace offering, it was a weapon. Reed and I spent hours sifting through its contents inside the locked back room of the bookstore, each folder peeling back another layer of deception. Damien had kept meticulous records of his actions. And Emma, for all her envy and bitterness, had been smarter than I gave her credit for. She documented everything too, out of self-preservation, or perhaps in anticipation of a betrayal of her own. There were voice recordings, audio logs of hushed calls between them. Emma urging Damien to hurry, Damien venting about the old man's damn pendant and how Claire still thinks love protects her. I listened to every word with clenched fists. My name wasn't a person to them. It was an obstacle. But the real bombshell came tucked deep in a hidden folder labeled simply, HB 1976. It contained scanned pages of my father's earliest estate documents, papers I had never seen before. Among them was a letter, typed but signed in his unmistakable hand. "To whom it may concern. If at any point the integrity of this estate is challenged by external parties, or if my daughter Claire Bennett is removed from decision-making against her will, this clause is to be invoked. Full ownership and control of the Bennett Trust is to revert immediately and irrevocably to Claire Bennett, effective upon authentication through the encoded pendant." Reed leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "This changes everything." The letter had never been filed formally. It had been locked away. But it was notarized, dated, and signed. It gave me ultimate authority, not just over the bookstore or the trust, but the entire estate structure my father had built for decades. The clause was like a detonator hidden in plain sight. "Why didn't he file it?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "Maybe he wanted to protect you from what it would mean," Reed said. "Or maybe he knew you'd only come looking when the time was right." The next day, we took the documents to the magistrate's office. The evidence, paired with the recordings, the financial logs, and now this final clause, was enough to fast-track proceedings. Within hours, a judge issued a protective order halting any and all external claims against the Bennett estate, pending full investigation. And just like that, Damien's empire of lies collapsed in the eyes of the law. Still, I couldn't celebrate. Not yet. There was one more entry in the ledger I hadn't read. the very last page. I sat alone in the office that evening, the safe door open, the pendant still warm from earlier contact with its magnetic lock. The final sheet was folded in half and marked simply, "Claire, read last." I unfolded it with trembling hands. Claire. Asterisk, you'll have seen by now what they tried to do. I'm sorry I didn't speak more plainly while I was still here. You always trusted too easily, and I didn't want to cloud your kindness with suspicion. But in this world, legacy is dangerous. Money makes blood run cold. Even family. Especially family, asterisk. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then you've already fought harder than I ever wished you'd have to. But I always knew you could. The bookstore, the pendant, the trust, they are yours. Not just because I loved you, but because you earned them. Now do with them what you will. Forgive, if you can. Destroy, if you must. But don't forget who you are, asterisk. Dad. I sat in silence for a long time, the paper in my hands, the words pulsing in my chest like a second heartbeat. Reed knocked on the door frame softly. You all right? No, I said. But I will be. We had one more move to make. Damien's extradition hearing was set for the following week, and Emma, true to her pattern, had already withdrawn her legal challenge, hoping to disappear into the background. But I wouldn't let her. Not yet. We filed a joint civil suit against both of them. Not for vengeance. For finality. For the public record. Their names would be tied to the fraud, to the lies, to the betrayal that nearly dismantled a lifetime of family trust. News spread quickly. The media, hungry for scandal, seized the headlines, asterisk antique empire betrayal, heir targeted in family trust scandal. Asterisk, I became the reluctant face of resilience. Claire Bennett, the daughter who fought back. Who held the key? But the attention didn't thrill me. It suffocated me. And just as the world started watching, I found myself wanting nothing more than to retreat. That night, I returned home and found a small envelope slipped under the door. No return name. No handwriting. Just a single object inside. Emma's locket. The one she had worn since childhood. Inside, a photo of us, two girls in braids, beaming in the sunlight, sitting cross-legged in the back of the bookstore. On the back of the locket was a note. Engraved, not written. I lost my way. But you didn't. Keep going, asterisk asterisk. For the first time since this began, I wept. Not for Damien. Not even for Emma. But for the piece of me that almost gave up. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, but in feeling. Pale walls, polished wood, and the quiet shuffle of papers and footsteps created an atmosphere both clinical and loaded. This wasn't just a hearing. It was the reckoning. Damien Sinclair stood at the defense table, flanked by his new legal team, people paid to make him look less guilty than the evidence screamed. He wore a gray suit I had never seen before, one probably borrowed or bought in desperation. The man who had once styled himself as polished and untouchable now looked hollow. Defeated. I sat across from him, not on the witness bench yet, but behind the prosecution's table with Reed and our legal counsel. The pendant rested inside my coat pocket, its presence grounding me. Every detail of this moment had been planned for months. Every document, every photograph, every piece of my father's ledger and Emma's recordings had been carefully assembled into a tapestry of truth. The magistrate presiding over the trial was known for cutting through emotional theatrics and focusing solely on facts. I didn't want drama. I wanted exposure. Prosecution may proceed with opening statements, she said. Our attorney stood and delivered a measured summary of the events, how Damien forged legal documents, manipulated access to a secured trust, and attempted to transfer ownership of private estate assets under false authorization. No embellishments. Just facts. The defense argued that Damien had been misled, that Emma was the architect, and he had simply followed her plan. They presented him as desperate, financially ruined, and emotionally unstable. A man who made bad decisions, but not a criminal mastermind. That was the moment I was called. I took the stand. My hands didn't tremble. I looked straight at Damien as I recounted the day I found his letter. The missing pendant. The tracking chip. The fake documents. The evidence buried in the safe. The recordings Emma handed over. He didn't just steal from me, I said clearly. He tried to erase me. I wasn't allowed to speak to the emotional toll, the sleepless nights, the hollowed sense of trust, the shame that came with betrayal. But I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for me. Then came the turning point. Reed stepped forward with the final exhibit, the encrypted pendant and the ledger clause written in my father's own hand. Verified by expert witnesses. Confirmed through metadata. A document that stated, without doubt, that I was the sole intended heir of the Bennett estate and that any attempt to bypass my authority would be considered fraudulent. The courtroom fell into silence. For the first time, Damien looked up at me, not with rage or arrogance. Just a flicker of something too dim to name. Regret, perhaps. Or fear. But I didn't look away. During cross-examination, the defense tried to paint me as cold. That I had abandoned my marriage. That I was obsessed with legacy. That I had driven Damien into desperation. But none of it landed. Because I never raised my voice. I never lashed out. I answered every question with clarity. I loved him, I said once. But he loved control more than he loved me. 2 days later, the magistrate issued the ruling. Guilty on all charges, fraud, forgery, attempted embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud an estate. Damien's sentence was handed down immediately. 8 years, minimum. No suspended term. No bail. He stood motionless as the gavel fell. As the officers let him out, he turned to me just once. There was no final word. No apology. Only silence. The same silence that had always followed his worst betrayals. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and voices called out. But I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't smile. I simply walked away, Reed at my side, my coat drawn close around me. We stopped at a quiet cafe, far from the noise. It's over, Reed said, watching me carefully. No, I replied. It's started. Because now, I wasn't just the girl who inherited a bookstore. I was the woman who defended it. Who stood up when everyone expected her to fall. Who spoke when others tried to erase her voice. That evening, I returned to the bookstore alone. I unlocked the door, turned on the soft lights, and stepped behind the counter like I had so many times before. The scent of old paper and cedar welcomed me back. I lit a single candle and opened the ledger one more time. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember where it all began. On the inside of the back cover, something caught my eye. A faint etching, barely visible. Stories live longer than the ones who tell them. I smiled. So did mine. The days after the trial were quiet in ways that felt unfamiliar. For months, my life had been dictated by court dates, legal documents, security scans, and late-night strategy sessions with Reed. Now, the silence felt both comforting and unnerving, like the pause after a deep breath before a scream or a song. The bookstore reopened slowly. I kept the hours short, just a few regulars filtering in at first, Mrs. Weatherby, who'd been reading detective novels here since the 1980s, and Arun, the young poet who always smelled of sandalwood and ink. They didn't ask questions. They just returned to their usual corners as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The estate was now mine, fully and uncontested. The court had ruled in my favor, not only preserving my father's legacy but officially dissolving all fraudulent amendments. Emma disappeared from public view entirely. Her name was no longer whispered in legal circles or estate boards. She had gone to ground. Whether out of shame or strategy, I couldn't say. But I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I had won. And the victory didn't taste like I thought it would. It was quieter, deeper, like the difference between thunder and a heartbeat. Reed stopped by the bookstore one afternoon with 2 takeaway coffees and a file folder tucked beneath his arm. "You're not going to like this," he said as he handed me the cup. "What now?" I asked. "Brightwell. He's filed for a license reinstatement in Glasgow." I closed my eyes and took a slow sip of coffee. "Of course he has." "He won't get it," Reed added. "Not with this ruling on record. But I thought you should know. The snakes always try to grow new skins." I nodded. "Let them. I'm not afraid of them anymore." We sat together at the counter as rain ticked gently against the windows. For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw Reed's shoulders relax. He looked tired in a human way, not a burdened one. "You know," he said, "you could take time off. Travel. Get away from all this." "I could," I replied. "But I won't. Not yet." Instead, I started renovating. Not just the bookstore, but the upstairs flat, which had been empty since my father passed. I stripped the walls, pulled up the carpet, and uncovered the original hardwood floor hidden beneath layers of time. I painted the walls a soft ivory and opened the windows each morning to let in the smell of the city and old pages. Then I made space for something new. A writing room. I had always written in the margins of books. Scribbled on receipts. Drafted stories in the spaces between grief and duty. Now, I gave those stories a home. A proper desk. A place where memory could meet fiction. Where pain could find structure. The first thing I wrote was not about Damien or Emma. It was about my father. A story of a man who loved quietly but fiercely, who saw the danger in his legacy and prepared his daughter for war without ever teaching her to hate. The next was about a woman who lost everything and found herself in the ruins. At night, I would sit in the writing room, the pendant hanging near the window where it caught the last light of dusk, casting reflections onto the ceiling like old constellations. Sometimes I'd imagine my father watching. Not as a ghost, but as a quiet witness. I visited my mother every day. Her health was fading gently, like the end of a candle's life, still glowing, but lower each time. She no longer asked questions. But when I held her hand, she squeezed it, and that was enough. When I told her Damien had been convicted, she simply said, "Good," and drifted off to sleep. One morning, I opened the back of the bookstore and found a package addressed to me. No return name. Inside, a small wooden box and a folded note. Claire. Asterisk, I was never brave enough to tell the truth. But you were. This belongs to you, asterisk. Asterisk asterisk s asterisk asterisk. Serena. The box contained a pair of gold cufflinks and a sapphire ring. Damien's. And beneath them, a slip of paper with coordinates written in careful, slanted handwriting. Reed helped me trace them. They led to a small beach in northern Portugal. One of the accounts Damien tried to funnel money through had been routed there, connected to a storage vault registered under Serena's name. She had shut it down. Quietly. Without drama. I smiled as I read the final transfer note: repatriated funds returned to the Bennett Trust. She didn't owe me anything. But she gave it anyway. The world was slowly righting itself. One page at a time. Spring arrived slowly in Edinburgh, like someone tiptoeing into a room they once ran through. The chill eased from the stones, and the cherry trees along the alley near the bookstore began to blossom in hesitant pinks. Life, it seemed, was learning how to move forward again. So was I. I spent most mornings now upstairs, in the writing room. The light poured through the window just right, falling across my desk in slanted patterns that reminded me of cathedral glass. Some days, I wrote for hours. Others, I simply sat and stared at the sky, letting silence answer the questions I no longer needed resolved. Downstairs, the bookstore had begun to thrive again. Tourists returned, drawn by the whispers of scandal and survival, but they stayed for the comfort, the smell of books, the charm of worn armchairs, the gentle music I now kept playing in the background. I hired a part-time clerk, a literature student named Eliza, who reminded me a little of myself before the storm. Curious, cautious, full of unspent fire. My mother passed quietly in her sleep just 2 weeks after Damien's sentencing. She held my hand until the very end. I told her everything was okay, that I had made it through. She didn't answer, but I liked to believe she heard me. We buried her next to my father on a hillside in South Queensferry, just where the sea meets the cliffs. The same place we used to picnic when I was small. I scattered wildflowers over the soil and read her favorite poem. Afterward, I stood there alone, pendant at my throat, hands in my pockets, the wind tugging at my coat. No words came. None were needed. Back at the bookstore, I opened the shop an hour late and put a small sign in the window: asterisk closed early today. Thank you for understanding, asterisk. No one questioned it. The regulars just nodded as they passed by. That evening, I unlocked the safe one final time. Inside was the ledger, my father's story, my inheritance, and the foundation of everything that had nearly been stolen. I held it in my hands, tracing the faded corners, the weight of it all sitting quiet in my lap. Then I walked upstairs, opened the drawer of my writing desk, and placed it inside. Not locked away. Not forgotten. Just kept close. Reed visited often. Sometimes with news, sometimes just for tea. Our conversations had shifted, from courtrooms and evidence to books and travel and quiet things. There was a gentleness in his presence now, like a man unburdened. Once, he asked if I planned to leave Edinburgh, take a break, see the world. I've thought about it, I told him. But this is where everything began. And where it should continue. One rainy afternoon, as we shared a scone and listened to the thunder in the distance, he handed me a manila envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Final audit report. The case is officially closed." I stared at the folder for a long moment, then slid it into a drawer without opening it. "I don't need to read it," I said. "I already know how it ends." He smiled. And I realized then that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it lingers in the corners of a quiet room. Sometimes it is simply the return of peace. The pendant still hangs by my desk. Not as a reminder of theft or betrayal, but of inheritance, not just of assets or names, but of strength. Of resilience. Of the fire passed down from one soul to another. And the bookstore? It lives on. With every turned page, every whispered recommendation, every story shelved or sold or discovered again, it breathes. It evolves. And through it, so do I. I no longer fear what might be taken. I only look forward to what I will create.